Iowa City's Other News is a program produced in Iowa City, and we cover the news you probably won't see other places. Today on the show, we have a lot of different segments. The first one we're going to take a look at is from the Peace Camp. We also have some footage about a peace initiative, the Iowa City Documentary Festival, and then we're going to wrap it up with some discussion of war in the movies, and we'll also have a Where's the Outrage piece from one of the Iowa City Other News collective members, Greg Thompson. So first of all, we're going to take a look at some Peace Camp footage. A couple PATV producers and collective Iowa City Other News collective members went to the Peace Camp on the University of Iowa campus on the north side of the Pentecrest, and interviewed some people. So we're going to see some footage from the Peace Camp in the next few seconds or so, and there's about 9 or 10 tents set up there on the Pentecrest, University Pentecrest. Let's take a look at that footage.
It's a place for open dialogue about the war.
That probably at least 75% of the people I talk to do go away either having learned something that they didn't know before, or having questioned some of their beliefs a little bit, or at least gaining a new perspective on what we at the Peace Camp stand for.
Well, there's still a lot of work to be done. I think these people are pretty much dedicated to sticking around until May 16th, whether the war ends or not, because we still haven't achieved our goal of educating people to, or at least getting people to think in different ways and not just depending on mainstream media for their information, and showing them where to get more information, and still creating a space where that kind of dialogue is safe.
I was around during the Vietnam War. I definitely don't agree with the way the soldiers were treated when they came home, and I think that puts a stigma on what we're doing now, but it's not the same thing. I totally support the people that are over there.
Okay.
I'm gonna die here. I'm gonna have hypothermia.
Thus, political language has to consist largely of euphemism, question-begging, and sheer cloudy vagueness. Defenseless villages are bombarded from the air, the inhabitants driven out into the countryside, the cattle machine-gunned, the huts set into fire with incendiary bullets.
But now that we're already at the conflict, it's hard to pull out, you know? It's like having sex. Once you get going, it's really hard to stop. So the best thing you could do is remember to put a condom on in the future and prevent this from happening.
Okay, we're back now. Iowa City Other News. We just saw some footage from the Peace Camp on the University of Iowa campus. There are peace campers there probably today, and you could go down and discuss why they're camping there. I know they've received a lot of kind of, what would I say, attacks from students who maybe don't understand what the Peace Camp is all about. But I know I've gone down and talked to the peace campers, and they're willing to discuss with you and have a dialogue about why they're there. So drop by and talk to them whether you support the war or not. They're not going to run you out of the camp. They just want to talk and have their voices heard. Okay, the next thing we're going to see is a piece from that Elliot and Steve Cantor put together, and they're interviewing Carly, I think her last name is Whitaker, about something called the Peace Initiative. So let's take a look at that footage.
Hi, I'm Greg Thompson with Iowa City's Other News. I'm here today talking to Carly Whitaker. Carly is considering initiating a petition drive in response to the Iowa City Council's refusal to discuss the peace resolution. Carly, tell us what your plans are.
Okay. Well, first of all, to give a little history about how we've arrived at this point. Since mid-January, a group of Iowa City residents has been campaigning and trying to ask the City Council to pass a resolution that would make Iowa City a city for peace. There 162, I believe, cities around the nation that have passed similar resolutions. Before the war, they were saying we oppose preemptive war with Iraq. Just recently, unfortunately, we weren't able to get the 3 council members we needed to put it onto a formal agenda so that this resolution would come to a vote. As a consolation prize, at least that's how some of us are viewing it, Mayor Ernie Lehman issued a proclamation on Tuesday, which basically, it was a strong proclamation insisting that Iowa City wants to work, supports international diplomacy in the UN in the process of diplomatic resolution to conflict. But unfortunately, as someone said, proclamations are what kings do. And we wanted to have a grassroots or an expression of a community sense that this was something that we did not agree with. So what we're considering right now is a citizens initiative, and what that would involve is getting 2,667 signatures of registered voters to say that we want to establish a peace commission within the city, to have an institution in the city that's devoted long-term to working for peace.
So what would a peace commission in Iowa City actually do?
Well, there are a multitude of things that it could. We're kind of using a bill that was recently introduced into the House of Representatives, Kucinich's bill that would establish a Department of Peace as a model. So looking at that, some things that a peace commission in Iowa City could do would be to train a corps of conflict mediators who could work with the police department or with groups who are in conflict to use nonviolent conflict resolution skills in our community. Another thing we could do is advise the council on socially responsible investing. Right now we invest in local banks, but we could work within that system to look for socially responsible ways of investing. Other things we could do are to develop peace curriculum to use in the schools of teaching students. There are studies that have shown that if students learn conflict mediation skills, these skills have ripple effects, and that translates into better performance in school. And it's something that's a real skill. It could really underlie a lot of the curriculum. Another idea is to expand the Sister City program.
Great. And how can people get involved with that petition drive?
Well, they could contact me. My phone number is 338-8865. I would love to hear from you. So that's it. Personally.
Thanks, Carly. This has been Greg Thompson with Carly Whitaker for Iowa City's Other News.
Okay, we're back at Iowa City's Other News. My name's Adam Burke, and we just saw a piece in an interview with Carly Whitaker, and let me just give credit where credit is due. That was produced by Greg Thompson. He was the editor and the interviewer. Steve Canner was the camera person. The piece previous to that of the Peace Camp, I shot a little bit of the footage and interviewed one woman, and Elliot Campbell, who's directing the show today, shot some of the other footage and edited it together. And he wanted me to mention his name on the show. The next piece we're going to look at is from a conference that takes place. This was the 4th annual conference this year on white privilege. And I had the opportunity to go and videotape and interview people and just attend some of the sessions at the conference. It took place April 9 through 12 in Pella, Iowa at Central College. It's organized by Eddie Moore Jr. And what we're going to look at here in a second is a keynote speech by Tim Wise. And Tim Wise is one of the leading white anti-racist activists in the country. You may have seen him on Donahue, where he took part in a show called Angry White Men. He has written extensively about white privilege. He's an essayist. He has just contributed to a book on race reparations or slave reparations. And so we're going to hear him talk a little bit about white privilege. And then actually, let me talk a little bit about white privilege just to kind of preface this and lead into it. White privilege is a symbolic way to think about the converse of racism. So that if we think about people who have been disadvantaged, discriminated against, and and all these things, economically disadvantaged, et cetera, we don't often think about the flip side, that for every disadvantage or underadvantage someone gets, there is another side of people that are being advantaged and privileged by something. So white privilege, the conference talks and discusses and has workshops on the concept that white people walk around with an invisible set of privileges that they may not even be aware of. It's kind of a difficult thing to discuss with white people and to get them to be aware of this and to realize that when they go into, for example, a Walmart store, they're not being followed around all day. Or if they decide to use a credit card or write a check, they won't be ID'd or they won't be looked at like, is this really your credit card? There's many other examples. I'm sure you can think of some on your own. Flesh-colored Band-Aids is a big example, easy one for us to grasp, because if you go to the store, there aren't dark skin bandages that are flesh-colored that have like extra melanin dye in them or extra melanin coloration. So white privilege then, if I can just give a short definition, would be an invisible system of privileges set up by us, for us, that we consciously and unconsciously use to negotiate our way through the world. To use a figurative analogy, one woman, Peggy McIntosh, wrote an article on white privilege, and she said that it's like an invisible knapsack that white people carry around, and in this knapsack are special passes, maybe a get-out-of-jail-free card, a map to places because they can easily ask directions wherever they are, passes, privileges, etc. That's like we carry it around. We're not aware that we have this backpack on and that we can just pull out a pass. It's our white skin, right? So there's a lot of other ways to talk about privilege. We can talk about male privilege and heterosexual privilege and et cetera, age privilege and able-bodied privilege and all these things. This conference is specifically talking about white privilege and the privileges that people with my skin color receive, whether or not they're aware of it. And no one at the White Privilege Conference is thinking like I'm a slave owner or that I instituted Jim Crow laws or anything like that. They're aware that I'm innocent of those crimes, but I continue to perpetuate a system of white privilege. So we're going to hear from Tim Wise, who was one of the speakers at the White Privilege Conference. Let me give you their website before we see that, www.whiteprivilegeconference.com. So let's take a look. Tim Wise, last week at the Privilege Conference.
And they found out that within 10 years they were returned to virtual slavery because the folks who liberated them didn't mean it. Only the privileged group has the privilege of being blind to that history and never learning anything from history and saying to themselves that we have liberated them, they love us. See, because the European mindset is this dualistic mindset, good, evil, bad guy, good guy, white hat, black hat. And so we're the good guys, Saddam's the bad guy, we overthrew him, they are happy. It's no shades of gray to the dominant group mindset, it's just white and black. Perhaps the people who are celebrating could easily turn on us if their families continue to die, and indeed will. What is happening now in Afghanistan? We liberated them, you heard that. And then we walked away from them. And so now the Taliban is regrouping in Kandahar, have virtually taken it over again, executing Red Cross workers. In fact, the Red Cross has shut down its humanitarian operation in Afghanistan because they cannot be protected. And we're not spending any money to protect them. And George Bush sent his budget to Congress, his proposed budget. You know how much money was in there to rebuild Afghanistan? Zero. And only because of congresspersons on both sides of the aisle that did say, now hold on a minute, we need to spend a little something, they were able to get $300 million. We spent $40 billion to bomb it. We're going to spend $300 million to rebuild it. Liberation. Only the dominant group could believe that that was liberation. See, the dominant group never has to second guess what it does. That's what white privilege is. You never have to second guess, triple guess, quadruple guess. And when you've gained so much of the property and the wealth of the dominance that you have through violence, it's easy to believe that that is the way that you will resolve all crises and that that will always work. Let me suggest to you that there are dangers in this paradigm. This idea that we have the right, and when I say we, I'm talking about white elites, because people of color, with the exception of Condi and Colin, don't buy it. That the white elites in this country believe that we have the right to tell countries who can and cannot have weapons of mass destruction. You can have them, but you can't. You can have them, but you can't. You can have them, but you can't. We sure as hell can. And you're not going to inspect our facilities. That we have the right to tell countries we can preemptively attack another nation because we think they may be a danger to us down the line, but you can't do that. What happened last week? Didn't hear this on the news either. India is making noise about attacking Pakistan over their dispute over Kashmir, because there's been a lot of Pakistanis killing Indians in Kashmir. India is saying enough is enough. We are going to launch an attack, and they're using the same mentality, and they're making the same argument that we used in Iraq, preventative warfare. And now the State Department is saying, now, hold on, that's not what we meant. See, white privilege allows you to think that you can make up rules that everybody else has to follow, and you don't have to. Because when you're the dominant group, you really don't have to, at least you think not, so you think no one's going to notice the hypocrisy. Because you don't notice the hypocrisy, or you think nothing of it. So we can make these rules, and you must follow them. How did our oil get under your sand anyway? If you don't believe that, ask yourself what would happen if tomorrow, because the president keeps saying, we want Iraq, that oil belongs to them. Yes, indeed it does. And let us imagine that a government were elected freely in Iraq, like I'm sure it's going to be, and they were to say, you know what?
Yeah.
Okay, you've just been watching footage from the White Privilege Conference that happened April 9 through 12 in Pella, Iowa at Central College. That footage was shot by a local Iowa City High School student who came with a group of PATV producers to the Privilege Conference. I'm now joined in the studio by Louis Schwartz on the end. He is a professor in the University of Iowa Department of Cinema and Comp Lit. Is that right?
That's
Did
right.
I get all that right?
An
Okay.
assistant professor.
Assistant professor, okay. And Renee Payne, to my right here, and she is the director of Public Access TV and a movie buff. We're going to talk about war in the movies, unless you guys want to start talking, introduce yourselves again, or give any comments on Tim Wise if you want to. What do you think of that? Go ahead.
He's pretty intense. He's
Yeah.
an intense guy.
He is. He really is.
He's right, though, and those facts are a little known and good, but it's sometimes a little hard to listen to.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's so intense, but
He is
it's
really.
good information.
Yeah.
It's kind of evangelical style,
He
sort
really
of.
does have that, yeah, preacherly kind of style, yeah. He was at the Privilege Conference last year. He came to Iowa City in January, so I've seen him talk several times. And I'm getting into, I can start to do the Tim Wise, the hand motions and stuff.
Maybe
Sorry.
you better rethink that.
We're going to talk about war in the movies, and we each separately brought clips in to play. And so why don't we have each of us set up those clips? Let's start with Louis.
You want to start with the newest one first?
Start with the newest one
Okay.
first? Yeah.
All right. So this is going to be a clip from Pearl Harbor, which is an interesting movie because it's about Pearl Harbor, as the title would suggest. And as most viewers probably know, that was Japan's first attack on the United States in World War II. But because it was such an expensive movie, and the two biggest markets for movies are Japan and the United States, it was designed from the very beginning to be sold both here and in Japan, and oddly enough, in another Axis country, Germany, too. So what we're going to see first is a fight scene between Ben Affleck and Josh Hartnett, which is part of the love story, which is how the film was promoted in Japan as a love story. And they're fighting because Ben just found out that Josh stole his fiancée, while Josh and his fiancée thought that Ben was dead, or their respective characters.
Okay. Let's roll that footage.
For my girl for me while I was gone. We thought you were dead, Rafe, and it gutted us both. And we were just trying to get on with our lives. Life is good, ain't it, Daddy? You know, you're a rotten drunk. You always have been. Yeah, well, you're a lousy friend. That's a new development. You left her to fight somebody else's war. And you made damn sure that I didn't go with you. And we thought that you were dead.
I almost did die, you little son of a bitch. Her face was the last thing that went through my mind. So don't stand here and tell me act like it's all right.
Yeah, Rafe, well, I stayed. I stayed, and you made sure of that. And some things changed. I hope you can get used to that.
Oh, I had to get used to it.
All right. We'll see how I can get used to it.
Hey, used to that, boy. Hey, that's my left hand, too. Hey. Right at the hula line, send that piece.
Okay, we're back now at Iowa City Other News. That was a clip from Pearl Harbor that Louis Schwartz brought with him, and talk about why you wanted to play that clip.
Well, just because it's as Renee pointed out, it's interesting because it's a sort of war fight between two friends, and then shortly after it, there's a real war between two enemy forces. But it's interesting that, and this is typical of Hollywood throughout its whole history, that in order to tell this very big story, they have to tell a small story that involves a conflict over love, and that sort of allows for two different kinds of endings. One of the interesting things about this film is that the producer, Jerry Bruckheimer, well, in interviews, he talked a lot about the historical accuracy of the film, which isn't so great as it turns out. There's not that much historical accuracy in the film, but he's very proud of what historical accuracy there is. At the same time, he also says that having a film which just ended with Pearl Harbor would have been a downer, and it wouldn't have sold in the American market, the biggest market in the world. It's the film's sort of primary market, in a way. So they had to add a love story which ends happily. Josh Hartnett dies, and Ben Affleck ends up raising his baby for him and marrying his fiancée. Sorry for the spoiler. Then there's a tacked-on raid, firebombing raid on Tokyo that happens at the very end of the movie, so that it ends happily on two notes, both the military note and the personal romantic note, which is basically to enhance its sellability. But the love story also functions to make it palatable in Japan, where marketing research showed that they like love stories, and so, you know, that was a big selling point.
So Hollywood tries to personalize it and sell this event of
Right.
Pearl Harbor,
Exactly.
which is going to draw people into.
Exactly.
Is that other clip ready? It's all ready to go? And this is going to be a shorter clip.
This is the big effects clip, which is the way the film was sold in the U.S., this is probably the most hyped shot in the movie, which is of a bomb hitting, I think it's the USS Arizona, a bomb from a Japanese Zero, and the camera's planted or it's as if the camera were planted in the nose of the bomb, so we descend onto the aircraft carrier with the bomb, which was a kind of effects achievement.
Let's play that clip.
Jesus Christ.
Another dumb drill.
No.
Oh, let it blow.
Keep it going.
Oh, we wanted to see the explosion.
Well, the ship blows up in another,
Yeah.
5 seconds, but be that as it may. So here the film was sold as both a patriotic spectacle, but also a big achievement in special effects, as you can see. And so it's as if the camera were, it's actually a computer animation, but it's as if the camera were just behind the bomb. And that's, to me, highly problematic, because the kind of bomb cam and showing off of the very big military technology is part of the kind of fetish of military technology that we've seen in the past few months, where if you notice all the reporting about Black Hawk helicopters and cruise missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles and so on, and all the technical information that we've gotten about stuff being used or that was just used in Iraq, Although interestingly, none of the really nasty stuff like depleted uranium. It's very, most people who hear that stuff are fascinated with it, and it gives them this feeling of, you know, patriotism and virility and all that kind of stuff. And indeed, when you teach a movie like this in class, no matter how critical you are, this has been my experience not only here, but also teaching in California, most of the people in the class get so hyped about the way the effects were made that the actual content of the movie becomes sort of invisible and kind of affects them without even knowing it. They can't take a critical stance because it's so cool that we, you know, visually came down with that bomb.
Wow, that was definitely the highest probably highest like animated section of the movie, right? That was all pure animation, that bomb dropping out.
Yeah.
And that movie, I don't know how many, it must have approached the cost of a Apache helicopter, maybe.
It was over $100 million when it was 140, I think, when it got green-lighted and was finished approximately at that budget. Somebody was actually fired because it took too long of a time to make its money, to make its profit. So one of the people involved in development got fired, but it actually did well, all markets told, when Germany, Britain, the States and Japan were all counted.
They don't cut different versions for Germany or Japan.
Yeah, they do.
They cut out scenes.
Yeah,
and
they cut out
other
scenes and they add other scenes. So there's a scene not in the American version of a Zero pilot looking down and seeing some little boys on Hawaii playing baseball and sort of shooing them out of his way with his hand, trying to get rid of them to make the Japanese.
We noticed the
sympathetic.
subtitles. Renee and I watched it last night. The subtitles were just not up there long enough for me to read. It was amazing how short shrift they got in the process. Should we play your clip? Are you ready for yours? Okay.
Sure.
Before we play this one, we want to mention that young viewers who may not be ready for this should maybe leave the room and
turn to SpongeBob SquarePants.
And turn to the Cartoon Network or something. And
just for a couple minutes.
This is a scene from Deer Hunter. Do you want to set it up?
Yeah.
And tell us why?
Okay, this is a scene I chose because when you first said you were going to do this program about war in the movies, this is the very first movie that sprang to my mind, The Deer Hunter. And it sprang to mind because I think a lot of times what's overlooked is the psychological effects or just you get so absorbed in bombs going off and guns shooting and the big blasts and things like that that I think in war you forget, or watching war, you forget about the quiet sort of psychological hell that people go through or must go through.
You mean people don't just fall in love during
They don't fall in love and they don't
wars
just
and
jump into an airplane and go bomb some things and then whoopee, you know, everything's fine and dandy. There are these nightmarish periods of time, and I thought Vietnam War to me represents like what the worst kind of thing would ever be like, where you're in a place, you're not familiar with the place, it's, you know, unfamiliar terrain, the enemy, you don't recognize who the enemy is and who the friends are. And then the scene I chose from The Deer Hunter is a scene where they're playing Russian roulette. So it's a pretty intense scene. It only lasts a couple minutes, but to me that it was just so excruciating watching this, well, the whole movie. This scene doesn't do it justice because it's just sort of the pacing of the movie. But this scene especially sort of is a little capsule of what I think of as what it must be like to be a part of any kind of a war. And so let's just roll this clip, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more.
Stevie, you gotta do it. You don't do it, they're gonna throw you in a pit. They throw you in the pit, you're gonna die. You gotta do it. You can do it. You can do it, Stevie. You can do it. Look in my eyes. Stevie. Stevie, look at me. Do it! Go ahead, show him you got balls. Show him you got balls. Ah, fuck you. You're not doing anything. Go ahead. Shoot me, go ahead. Come on. Go ahead. Go ahead, Stevie. Go ahead. Show him you got balls. Go ahead.
Cover you. Cover you. Mày chỗ đang đứng mày.
Hey, kid.
Chỗ đang
Kid. Look at me, Stevie, you did it.
chỗ đang đúng mày.
Stevie, just show these backs. Show it.
Okay, we're back. Iowa City Other News, you just saw a clip from The Deer Hunter. We're talking about war in the movies with Louis Schwartz and Renee Payne next to me here. Renee brought that footage for us to wake us up Saturday morning.
I just can't watch that scene without like having my stomach ball up into a tight little knot. And the thing I want to point out is the reason sort of epitomizes to me the war is this person is being forced to do something that he absolutely rejects in every way, shape, or form. And I can't imagine that anybody really goes to war. I mean, at some point, I would think people in a war have to be put in that situation, or they might be put into that situation where they're having to do something that they completely reject in every way. And then the psychological effects, like, this movie is about, you know, then living with those things that you had to do. And it's just so striking and powerful to me that I just wanted to bring that clip in because after seeing a movie like that, I can't believe people could see that and then ever want to go to war again. It's just so surprising.
Again, yeah.
You know, like, who
Whereas
would watch this?
I can watch Pearl Harbor and think, I'm ready to go.
Let's
You know, let's go fight and let's be patriotic.
Right,
and,
but a movie like that, and I just don't know how people watch things like that.
Well, in The Deer Hunter, they're incapable of normal relationships after the war, and Ben Affleck at the end of Pearl Harbor is super capable of normal relationships, right? He can raise somebody else's child with the woman he loves that's a product of infidelity, and one of the last shots, or the last shot, is this golden magic hour sunset of the three of them, you know, remembering the Josh Hartnett character.
Exactly.
So it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good little juxtaposition there. The footage I brought is kind of comedic, I guess, in a way. It's from Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. This movie is a parody of the book Failsafe and the movie Failsafe, I think. So we're going to see the scene where the first atomic bomb is actually dropped out of a bomber airplane onto Russia. And if you haven't seen this movie, you should watch it because it's great.
Target distance, 4 miles. Roger. 4 miles. Auto CDC and Emmanuel Telefax link.
Auto CDC into manual telefax link.
Target distance, 3 miles. Roger, 3 miles. Target in sight. Where in hell is Major Kong?
Hey, what about Major Kong?
Okay, we're back now. Iowa City Other News. That was a clip from Dr. Strangelove that I brought to the show. It's interesting to compare that one with the clip Louis brought of the bomb, because this one, the special effects have suffered through the years, and it doesn't look quite as real. But that scene is still one of probably the most memorable one in the movie. Slim Pickens gets on the bomb to loosen it. The bomb is stuck or something, and ends up just riding it down and no worries. That guy doesn't have any worries. He's just riding a bucking bronco and heading to his doom. So war in the movies. What other movies were you considering bringing, or what else? What are some other effects of war in the movies? Like, I know during World War II, they a lot of movies had patriotic messages, don't waste gas and work for the war effort and things like that. Do we see that nowadays, do you think, as much? Like in, I don't know, what
well,
movies
there's
have come out?
for example, the poster to not a war movie, but What a Girl Wants, originally had the teen starlet of that movie, who I'm embarrassingly forgetting right now, giving a peace sign between two beefeaters, and then the poster was modified because they didn't want to get too political.
Too political.
So now she's just standing there, for example.
Huh.
So there's, Karl Rove, who's the chief political advisor to the Bush administration, had a big meeting with Hollywood producers that had two purposes. One was to get producers and writers to imagine various potential terror scenarios so that they could be preempted. And the other was to try and get patriotic content into the movies. And you happen to have a bunch of movies that were like that in production already, like Heart's War, and Black Hawk Down, and what's the new Bruce Willis one called that's unwatchable? Tears of the Sun,
Tears of the
right?
Sun, that's right.
So a bunch of movies like that about recent U.S. military intervention or not so recent stuff. Even that John Woo movie, Wind Talkers, about the Native American code speakers, kind of fit into that.
Yeah, there have been a lot of war movies that have come out pretty recently, like this whole slew of them, mostly with Bruce Willis as the star. And that's pretty disturbing, I think. It's just supposed to, I don't know if it's supposed to get us all revved up or what, but...
I think, like Michael Moore, it's a little bit of fear. The sum of all fears was another one, right? To show us what a nuclear attack would be like, and that we should...
Or The Day After, or...
Day After. I was going to bring a clip from The Day After, but I couldn't figure out that movie. I had nightmares about that movie.
Sometimes I think that they have wars to generate more Hollywood cinema. It's like there's always a story in a war. I mean, because that's the nature. There's gonna be somebody who rescues somebody, and so it's like, oh, cool, a new story. We can make a movie about it, and that just bothers me a little bit. I think there should not ever be any movies about war. There just shouldn't. We shouldn't glorify it in any way, shape, or form. Even, I don't know, I mean...
Even the heroes like Cuba Gooding Jr., who got up on deck and shot at the things, even though they're supposed
What
to
does
be a
that say,
cook.
though? What message does that send?
Well, it says a lot, right? Because, I mean, not only does it send this message about violence that you're concerned about, but it makes it seem as if in this time of extreme duress, a black cook is able to come to the fore of the military. And then the assumption is that after the war, something good and progressive will happen to him. But it doesn't, the movie doesn't pick that up. And what in fact happens after World War II is a big betrayal of black GIs, where integration doesn't happen, Jim Crow doesn't end for a long time, and it takes Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and that grassroots movement to get civil rights in the South. And
Veterans loans after World War II extended to white people only.
Right, exactly.
Not to African Americans.
All that kind of stuff. So that's a good example to look at, I think.
Yeah.
Another thing I think is really interesting is how they dehumanize the war, where what you're trying to do is shoot a plane out of the air. I mean, there's no personal story, there's no individual in any of the enemy planes or ships or whatever. That's just...
It's just an object.
It's just an object. It's just something to put, like, I got 6 of them, I got 7 of them. And
Yeah.
there's no personal story. Every one of those people is an individual with just as much feeling for what they're doing as the Americans. And why do we discount that? Why is that just...
Well, the news does the same thing, right?
Mhm.
Like, I mean, it hasn't been reported that there have been, by international estimates, between 1,300 and 1,600 counted civilian Iraqi casualties, but we know there are 105 or whatever it is U.S. military casualties, and we don't know the names of very many Iraqis except the ones who are on wanted posters.
We also haven't seen, just yesterday I heard on BBC that there are protests in Iraq of Iraqis saying, get out of our country, we don't want to be occupied anymore. You don't see that on...
AOL Time Warner covered it this way. They said, they're liberated and they're mad at us on their little splash page when you log in, I think on Thursday or Wednesday.
Tim Wise, in his speech, in a different section of that speech, was talking about the little flags that Iraqis had, and he said, where do we think they got those flags? They go down to Walmart and buy out all the flags. And was that before the war or after the war? They were handed those flags, obviously, by troops, and just a big PR thing.
And another thing, I saw the picture of when they pulled down the Saddam statue.
Yeah.
They widened it out. And they
Yeah,
put
and
that
it's
on
an empty
there.
square,
It's
right?
empty. It's like all that's around there are like some military people and
It's
a
a total
few.
staged event. Yeah.
Pretty much.
The website, I was going to play this, or we have the listing for the website that you can see that picture is at www.informationclearinghouse.info. And it'll show the picture you're talking about, because all the pictures I've seen on the news, the mainstream news, are close-ups.
Right.
The statue comes down. It's a
Right.
symbolic event. One nationally syndicated columnist in one of the local papers I read said, this image is a keeper from the Iraq War too, that this is a symbol of the entire war, that we liberated the people and removed this guy from regime, and we don't even know if he's alive or dead, or if he's an imposter or the real guy. And
It's not going to be the model for the Iwo Jima statue, but the Iraq version.
Maybe.
It's awful.
Maybe. What was the other thing I was going to talk about? Michael Moore. Did you watch the Oscars, Louis?
Sure.
And Michael Moore spoke out, used all of his time to basically speak out against the war and the fictitious election, and he said, this is why I brought up all these nonfiction documentarians. He recently said, you know, they're just trying to scare us with their talk of you're going to be suppressed and censored and things like that. He said his book went back up to #1 on the bestseller list. The Dixie Chicks are still selling millions of albums.
You can't
They're
get a
doing
ticket to their
well.
concerts.
You can't. Their concerts sell out.
Sadly, Madonna caved in and withdrew her video, though, which is weird because she doesn't exactly need the money from the album sales. But did you hear about this?
No, I didn't.
There's a song called American Life, which is a critique of materialism, sort of, and also a dance tune.
From the Material Girl.
From the Material Girl on the upcoming album, The Singles Out. And she made a video in which there's a fashion show with all the models are in camo, and there's apparently, nobody's seen it, but there's apparently really violent things that happen. One part, she tosses a grenade at a George Bush impersonator who lights a cigar with it, and so on. And when first asked about it, she said that she had reached this stage in her career where she didn't care about popularity and so on, and she just wanted to say what she wanted to say. She wasn't pro-Iraq or anti-Bush, she was just pro-peace and so on. And then mysteriously, the day before I think it was to be released on MTV, she pulled it.
Huh. So she either caved to pressure from without or from outside?
Probably from inside her own little industry, because you know, the people around her sure want to make as much money off the record as possible.
We have a clip from the Iowa City Documentary Festival, and if they can get that ready in there. This was about 2 weeks ago. Did you go to any of the documentary fests?
Sadly, I was out of town.
I only caught one of them, but Teresa Seeberger, who's a Iowa City Other News Collective member, was on the board of that group, and so we'll see a little bit of footage from the documentary about the School of Americas, or the Western Hemisphere School of, I don't know what they changed the name of the School of Americas. So we'll see that, and then we'll see an interview with one of the festival organizers.
started out duty, honor, country. I liked the idea of being of service to my country. I liked integrity, the duty, the honor, the responsibility. That's why people join the military, well, the majority anyway. Not to go off to kill people, but because they want to defend the Constitution. They want to defend democracy.
I'm not a film major, I'm in fact a political science major, and it just had a wide range of things. We had a film called Oh Babylon that was about September 11th, but it wasn't like your typical September 11th. It was sort of like a conspiracy theory type film, but it also had like we had also had funny documentaries, and so I think it was a very diverse thing. You don't have to be, you know, a film expert to come and enjoy documentaries because they're real and they're about real people and real stories. And it's a way to get your voice out.
We're back now, Iowa City Other News, and some footage of an interview with an organizer from the Iowa City Documentary Festival. That footage was from a little clip. I was trying to sneak in a shot of the School of the Americas documentary. Coming up next on Iowa City Other News is our recurring segment called Where's the Outrage? And Greg Thompson, Iowa City Other News Collective member, is going to talk about his outrage and where it is. So Greg, are we ready with him?
Thanks, Adam. I'd like to know where the outrage is about the slanted war reporting that goes on NPR and on WSUI radio. If you remember, last year there was a fundraising drive at WSUI, and people donated over $5,000 in support of alternative radio. An Iowa City resident named Kelly Putman offered a $2,000 dollar-for-dollar matching grant, and they did a 1-hour show for alternative radio and raised well over $5,000. Phones were ringing off the hook. They had to call staff back in from the parking lot to come answer the phone. If you're familiar with Alternative Radio by David Barsamian of Boulder, Colorado, you'll know that it's the only program on WSUI that features speakers such as Noam Chomsky, Winona LaDuke, Angela Davis, people who really criticize U.S. foreign policy. And I think it's a shame that now, after this massive outpouring of support from the people of Iowa City, that WSUI has again dumped alternative radio from its schedule, just like they did after 9/11. I called Dennis Reese a few days ago and asked him why alternative radio is no longer on. He told me that he's preferred to put BBC war coverage on to cover the war in Iraq. But I told him that it seemed like whenever the pressure was on and during a time of national emergency, that he shies away from controversial programming. He vehemently denied that. I'd like to ask people to think about what is the purpose of public radio. According to the Carnegie Commission of 1966, which was the foundation for the creation of National Public Radio, they were charged with providing a voice for groups in the community that may otherwise be unheard. The Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 calls for programming of high quality obtained from diverse sources. And I'd just like to ask you, is WSUI fulfilling that mission? What we see from NPR, which constitutes a great deal of WSUI's fare, is war reporting that de-emphasizes the civilian casualties, that relies too heavily on Pentagon and administration sources, and does not give a balanced viewpoint of anti-war views. In fact, the one organization that's best fulfilling the mission of public broadcasting in Iowa City, I feel, is public television. It is public access television, Channel 18. Since the start of the war and for a few months before, me and about half a dozen other producers have sponsored Democracy Now!, which runs from 7 to 9 in the morning. And it includes many of the voices that are never heard on WSUI or NPR radio. And they also allow sponsors. Free Speech TV is the network that provides Democracy Now!, and they do allow programming to be sponsored by gay and lesbian groups, civil rights groups, human rights groups, environmental groups, and anybody whose agenda doesn't exactly mesh with the administration's agenda. It's also interesting to note the purpose of National Public Radio. The person who's currently the CEO of National Public Radio is Kevin Close, and he is the former director of the International Broadcasting Bureau, which is the propaganda arm of the U.S. government overseas. It oversees Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio and Television Marti. Today, Kevin Close is using his propaganda skills to manufacture consent for this immoral war in Iraq, and it mostly goes unchallenged on NPR. So I'd like to point out to you all the great job that Public Access is doing. Anybody can produce a show, anybody who can become certified, and I would just like to say that this year I will be sending my money to Public Access Television in support of free speech TV, Democracy Now!, and the wonderful programming that is produced by local producers. WSUI, I feel, self-censors, and Public Access Television does not do that. In fact, they cannot do that. They must air whatever the producers want aired. So I'd just like to urge you all this year to consider sending your money to the real supporter of free speech in Iowa City Public Access Television. Thank you very much. I'm Greg Thompson for Iowa City's Other News.
Okay, thank you, Greg. That was a segment called Where's the Outrage, where we hear angry voices. And Greg's talking about WSUI. Thanks for the plug for PATV, too, definitely. Right now we have PATV producer Steve Newell in the house. And Steve wanted to make a comment. I'm guessing it's anti-war.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, you know, I've had some experience now for about a little over a year producing with TV media. And before that, I did a little bit of work with Mediacom, of all things, with computers in New York City. And one thing that keeps reoccurring in my thinking about the problems in producing and getting your point across is that, you know, you can gesticulate and you can, you know, use your eyebrows and stuff like this, but ultimately, you're a talking head, as in David Byrne's, you know, you're a talking head. If the viewing audience would please go along with me on this existential point about media and covering something like a war, okay? Go like this, go, okay? Do that while you're watching TV with me. Now, your TV cannot convey that existential dimension of it. Now magnify the significance of doing this with me right now. Magnify the significance of this about 10,000-fold. And now you are realizing what the problem for a producer is with trying to convey to you what a war is. And as a man who at 18 years old was on the Coast Guard cutter Basswood, 180-foot brass-keeled Coast Guard cutter with 4 machine guns, helping in the emergency operations of the 7th Fleet in the evacuation of Saigon in the spring of '75. I can tell you that this part is the part that television never conveys to the viewer. And you know, if you could imagine having to work closely with other people with this constant existential anxiety of the fact that any moment you might hear this sound, and you know that if you ever hear that sound while you're sitting there doing your job, that means that the reality of this is going to change rather abruptly. It's a hard thing to convey for a TV producer, but as the viewing, you know, civilized society audience, it's even hard to imagine walking up to a total stranger and going to them. So a lot of things about war are kind of hard to convey through the two-dimensional media of the television. A lot of the things that we need to be concerned about the reaction, or what in psychology we call the reaction formation, that of people who have been through this, even on the beneficial side politically of this environment, what they're going to react with in their existential reality as human beings, we've got to try real hard, because the media of television are probably our first media of modern, you know, learning about what's going on. It's hard to convey this point with this media. Thank you.
Steve, while you're here, let me ask you something else. You, a few months ago, came into PATV and you were talking about depleted uranium and the way that that's used in ammunition and things. And Louis Schwartz briefly mentioned it, and mentioning in it, he mentioned it in light of the fact that mainstream U.S. media completely leaves depleted uranium out of its reports on Iraq War and the previous Gulf War. What's going on with depleted uranium, or why should we be concerned about that?
You know, National Public Radio just yesterday on Science, the Science program, Science Friday, they mentioned the depleted uranium. So it obviously has been declassified since I was employed in the military during the Clinton years, Carter years and Clinton years. You see, if you take in physics an object and you launch it out of a cannon or something at another object to try to penetrate it, you have the explosion of the propulsion behind it, you have the aerodynamics of the shape. Basically, air friction and the propulsion behind it are the two factors determining for a given steel object its penetration into the target. But if you can increase the mass, the weight, the density, in other words, of the metal object, then its penetration ability is tremendously greater. Simultaneously, if you can make a metal that has a higher density, then it deflects metals of less density. So these are the two physical reasons that depleted uranium, a very heavy metal obviously, has been used in alloys. And the problem is, every time it impacts something as a bullet or a cannon shell, it makes dust. That dust has a half-life of better than 5 million years. And
it's all over Kuwaiti and Iraq right now.
It was top secret, I understand, back during the original Gulf War. The general public it was felt that they should not know about it, but it was essential to our ability to destroy the armor of the enemy, is the way that they argued. It was a necessary collateral damage. They said they cleaned it all up, but like I'm saying, it's dust, you know. How do you clean it all up?
It's in the groundwater.
It's in the soil around the explosions, at least. It doesn't move very much because it's heavy. And it's black dust, so they can clean it up. They say they can clean it up. But the thing is, it is an ongoing risk. It's a risk because if they react by sending it back to us somehow, that's like dirty bomb questions, you see.
So. We have to wrap up this show, unfortunately. Thanks for dropping by, Steve. I'd like to also thank Louis Schwartz, Renee Payne, Greg Thompson for Where's the Outrage, and for camera work and editing. And he's in the booth right now working sound. Elliot Campbell did some camera work, editing, and he's directing the show. I did a little bit of camera work. I don't think I did any editing. Iowa City Other News will replay on Wednesdays at 10 p.m., 10 to 11, and once again next Saturday at 11 a.m. So if you missed any of this show, set your VCR or tune in at those times, Wednesday 10 p.m., Saturdays at 11 a.m. And thanks for watching. More information about this show, or if you have questions or comments, you can leave a message at 339-7260 or email ic_othernews@yahoo.com. This has been Iowa City Other News, the only regularly produced TV news show in Iowa City. We're the only one. There are no other news stations out there producing TV in Iowa City, so come to us for your news, okay? For your other news in particular. Thanks for watching. This has been Adam Burke, Iowa City Other News, signing off.
The budget, but what do we have left in our council budget?
We're cutting there.
Cutting it. I mean, if we can finance a water study, maybe we can finance the
utility study.
Maybe we should be financing it.
Well, I do think that if we go forward with the strategic plan, one of the goals of the strategic plan has got to be self-sufficiency, which I'm sure it would be. I mean, I hear that.
It's been our goal for a long time.
Well, I don't think that's, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's the way we all live it.
If you're talking about 50,000 was placed in the council budget, here's memo.
There'll be some left over.
That's for the electric.
Is for 35,000, there might be
15,000.
10 to 15
All right.
there. One other point that I want to just make people aware of, it isn't going to make any difference in what we do here, but sale of the land then puts it into private property, which then becomes taxable and assists our general fund from this direction.
That's correct.
So having the balance between leased and purchased is sort of a win-win for both of us.
Well, and then
Leased land would pay tax.
even the leased property has to pay taxes.
Well, they'll pay on the building,
Right.
not on the, on the property.
Well, and they're asking for TIFs, which would be, I assume on the building part, which would negate any taxes for a number of years.
If you approve it.
If we approve it.
Right.
But
Well,
Individual.
That's what they're asking for, and so
One
that's
by
part of the
one,
park.
we'll look at each project.
So just keep in mind, though, there might not be any. The council tends to approve TIFs, and
We do like them.
And TIF is there for an economic development tool that builds our tax base that will continue to produce taxes over a very long period of time. So when we look at 3 to 5 years on a TIF or a declining abatement of taxes, that is still a good investment in my mind.
I have one question. There's no fence lines or road signs that you can hook on some other TIF. Never mind.
We can connect it by air. All right. The next item on the agenda is...
Ernie, can
Yes,
I ask what you
please.
decided?
Pardon?
What did you decide?
I think that we have agreed that the goal of the airport is self-sufficiency. I also think that it is not I'm just speaking for myself. I don't think we can sit here and put a date on self-sufficiency. I think there has to be something come back here in the way of a plan that says we believe we can do it by, and we may decide that your time is too long and negotiate something, but unless you got numbers and stuff to work with, I mean, there's so many variables. What happens if the economy goes sour and you don't sell a piece off the airport commercial for 3 years? Or if you sell it all in 1 year? I mean, there are so many variables that...
We're very fortunate that we have that land to sell. Lots of airports don't have that.
And I think it's really choice stuff.
Oh, it is.
Are we all agreeing to the strategic plan?
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the real question
That's what I kind of thought I heard, but.
Yeah, I'm asking.
That's where I'm going.
Forward.
That's
I didn't
what
want
Steve's
to...
asking.
I'm asking did you confirm the strategic plan?
Do we agree that the strategic plan is a necessary part of what we're asking the airport commission to do?
Yes.
Is this the plan that they've presented to us?
No.
No.
Okay.
They don't have a plan. That's one of the reasons that we're sitting here batting things back and forth, because they don't have a plan to work with. We don't have very difficult to talk back and forth if we don't have something on the table.
Are we going for a objective, somebody that's not involved to help draw up the plan?
Yes.
They already have somebody to do it.
Okay.
That was
Chosen
presented
someone
to
that
us.
We choose to finance.
Okay.
Is there...
And we're choosing to finance.
Yes.
Yes. You've got a bunch of commissioners
I move that-
asking for help, and I'm
can't
certainly in
vote.
favor of it.
All right.
I move that we...
We can't. We're not going to have motions here, but do we concur?
I would go along with Steve's memo. I think we have to get other things in order before we approve the strategic plan.
I would.
think it's addressing the issues that he brought up that I have concerns about, so I'm not in favor at this time of
Okay.
doing that.
I think...
I'm in favor of
The
it.
plan that they have here, it's real difficult to reach the spot where Steve's memo is talking about on marketing and the value of the assets to create money. And I think it's a total package. I'm willing to go that far to say that to get where we need to go, I think we need the full package, not start at money and try to work backwards.
The one thing we talked about the last time, since we're approving more money for the airport here, is we talked about somehow the airport manager reporting to Atkins on the everyday business or weekly business or monthly business. Ernie, you brought that up last night?
Well, I don't know that I did, but I do think that's coming up under item number 7. So that will come up. Ross?
The only piece I was going to add is, I mean, I'm okay with you going forward with the strategic plan, but you have to have that piece to answer the question. Okay.
But I don't think we can get those pieces without the...
I understand that, but if they walk away from the strategic planning process without that piece, then it failed.
And we won't pay them. Because that's the product we're asking
if that's part of the product, then they don't, yeah.
Then we have 6-1 in favor of moving forward with this.
Ernie, it would be my intent, since I assume I've taken this as far as they have, that I'd authorize a transfer from the contingency, which means they can virtually begin as soon as they submit their paperwork.
Right.
Is that what you want?
I think that's what we want.
Okay.
And just to partially answer Connie's question, Ron meets with Steve and the other staff weekly. They have a staff meeting. I assume they...
That's been that way, right.
Do we agree that these funds can come out of council money?
They're coming out
Those
of contingency.
contingency account, that's why we have an emergency account.
But because that's coming out of this fiscal year, and we're talking next fiscal year.
And then, and if I can answer Dee's question, then the likelihood is that in the upcoming budget, we are over budgeted for the public power study.
Oh.
Remember, you said use it,
right.
so we would be over budgeted in that, assuming it comes in at the
34 something.
whatever the number was, yeah.
Round 35.
But we're in the fiscal 03, and they want to start this thing. I want to be able to authorize release of the money so they can go get their contractors put together. That's what I heard you tell me. Okay.
Item 5 is marketing airport services. My personal feeling is that's part of your strategic plan. If there is, I have a question that I think perhaps relates to public relations and marketing and et cetera. And this is just an observation. I cannot for the life of me understand why you don't have your airport manager's office in the terminal building. I mean, we don't put the city manager's office in Public Works or at the sewer plant or at the water plant.
Thank you.
I mean, that could change. That could change. But I can't understand for the life of me when someone goes into the airport, someone flies in here, it lands, or someone from the public goes out there, the airport manager is not accessible.
Absolutely agree. But right now we're on a lease that gives all that property to the business that's there. It would be tough to go back and renegotiate.
All of it?
The terminal, versus other than the public spaces, those offices all belong to the business.
When you go in, all the offices on the...
They use them all.
I mean, they're all leased when you go in that terminal building, all the ones on the...
Public space right there by the windows, the main floor, that belongs to the city.
Right, no, I understand that, but all of the rest of the office space is leased.
It's generating revenue.
Could I suggest that you talk to the people down there and see if you can work something out? Because I think that's to their advantage as much as it is the rest of the community, that our manager be visible.
Could that be part of your strategic plan there?
Well, we're actually negotiating with them on some issues of that very nature.
I just
bring the airport manager.
I think that it's so important, and frankly, I don't think we've had the negative comments about the airport nearly as much in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years that we had previously. I mean, I think that the airport has enjoys a fairly...
You put a beautiful facility out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I just think that it's for your sake as well as the public's sake and the people who fly in and out, it would really be nice if you could walk in and see manager over the door and you got somebody there. All right. But marketing is going to be something you're going to address in your...
It's one of the value-added products that comes out of this business strategic planning.
Okay,
all right, project, I'm sorry.
I have a really stupid question. Tell me what your revenues are. The hangar rentals.
Let's let Ron answer that.
You want specifics, or do you want generally what an airport gets? Airports get money.
I'm not sure I really understand.
Airports get money from renting land and space. That they either rent the concessions, they rent the farms, they rent the businesses. That's where an airport gets its money. If it has commercial or scheduled air traffic, commercial traffic can be charged a landing fee. If you have a passenger terminal, you could charge a passenger service fee, and that's where commercial airports make their profit. But what you get is we get to rent the land, build buildings, and rent hangar space in those buildings, or rent land to farms so that they can...
Or businesses.
And businesses. That's where the money's come from on a capital like that. And the average, industry average for an airport is $10 of invested revenue to $1 return.
Ron,
That is per airport.
what is our income on a monthly or yearly basis from all those things? Do you know?
About 155 to 160,000, I think, is what
160
we.
was the projected for next
I
year.
think what we budgeted in
160.
'04.
Okay.
Income.
And how much is that encumbered in paying back for the hangars?
All of it.
That's just total income.
I didn't hear you. What?
Oh, no, we got salaries and that kind of stuff. I didn't.
Well,
No,
85,000.
how much of it is encumbered with the payback on the
100%, subsidizing them
on the
180,000.
leases, though? I mean, people are looking at total expenses, and there's a couple or three very fixed things that have to come out of the top of that 160,000.
That's following.
I think it's
What's the difference between the debt
85,000
servicing and our
for the
operating
hangar loan.
question?
They're subsidized.
It takes $340,000 a year to operate the airport.
Well, remember...
Between the income that you take in.
No, it does not. Because master plan and some of those expenses are being financed by our debt service, separate levies.
But it takes $340,000 to make the debts on the loan and...
Not all the loans. You have loans that are being financed through the debt service fund. That's right. That's why I was bringing up this in aggregate. Okay, you with me? All right.
I don't think we can answer that question, Nick.
No, I don't think so, but those are the kind of things that we really need to be able to answer. And that's the
Which is
sort of
kind of
thing you
what
should get from a
I
plan.
think all we'll ever, when you talk about airport self-sufficiency, I mean, I kind of revisit that, what we're only probably ever going to be able to do is come up with operating budget, the money it costs for us to turn on the lights and run an airport. And when you go beyond that into the debt servicing and capital improvements, I doubt that the airport will ever become self-sufficient regarding that side.
Well, that's...
But operating
We'll get that
budget
from
is
your
what
study.
what the goal for self-sufficiency would be, that we'd be able to turn on the lights, pay the employees, and run the airport with monies generated from within the confines of the airport.
Okay, project updates. Improving internal controls. I'm not sure I know exactly what that...
The internal controls were a result of the report we did, and things are doing very well.
Okay. Runway extension, what's the time frame? Do we know that?
Some of these things were put on, Ernie, just to allow you to ask questions about those.
Right.
Okay.
But the runway...
Do you want an update? Do you want an update on the runway?
Well, I mean, is there...
We're proceeding with the process of getting the environmental impact statements done and the obstruction stuff done and the...
04?
Yeah, whatever that... I don't know the exact dates, but we went through that schedule.
Okay.
And we're on track so far.
And then the north-south runway will close only after the extension is completed on 25, is that right?
Right.
And that's projected.
04, 05,
What was
probably.
that date, Ron? Fiscal year?
If we continue to get the federal funding, fall of '05 would be the soonest.
Well, I would suggest you not sell, they only sell enough land to pay off the debt.
Well, that would be something we need to coordinate with you, because of the agreement, the way it's written, puts that sale on your shoulder. You're the deciders on those.
Well, no, there's a much larger issue than that, too, because if we have all that property listed with a commercial real estate agent, and he feels it's all for sale, and suddenly he gets a buyer and we say no. I mean, I think this all hinges on your strategic plan. Comes back, there may be a recommendation that you sell 40%, you sell 60, you sell it all. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
But
We
that's
did-
why you need those things.
We did talk about this issue with the realtors, saying that we may well not want to do a one or all or none kind of deal, because there are some people that are approaching us that potentially would do leases versus, for instance, Civil Air Patrol might be much more interested in a lease than they would be in buying something, because it's a governmental agency. They much prefer not to own assets. If we were looking at the long term and you're talking about 05 runway paving, and we know that we have 10% of that to come as a capital project, I would like to know what kind of dollars we're looking at for that.
It was in our capital improvement budget submitted to...
I haven't seen
Sorry. I don't have that with me.
But I hate to keep nagging on this, but I'd like to get an answer because your strategic plan may take a while, and you're already...
90 days.
90 days.
You have a realtor in charge of selling this land. What if he sells the whole package before you're done?
90 days?
Pay off
We'll probably have a street dance.
The county would have really improved if that's the case.
No, but I don't want you to do that.
I don't think anything will happen that fast, but, and actually, I think in some ways, that area being fenced off already, it's less a part of the future plan of the airport than what we own right now. Because there will be other developmental opportunities, perhaps on the western side, once Mormon Trek is in and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but can I say that?
But what we're looking for from them, especially the airport side, is where are the aeronautical opportunities out there? Can we bring in businesses to the airport that will help pay the airport's way? Bring in business aircraft that pay the way, that will allow the businesses there to hire more mechanics, we'll pump more fuel, we'll use more of the runway. That's where we hope to bring self-sufficiency to the airport, not selling off beats of land or doing other things non-aeronautical. That's the emerging concepts that we hope to bring forward.
My best guess on the probability of that happening is minus 0.1%.
But certainly, when that consultant gets here, if he says, don't sell that land, well, we'll listen, you know.
Yeah, what investor would want to buy it at all? Yeah.
Well, we can tell you what our experience has been over the past.
Of course, you haven't been able to sell it.
But our inquiries, we've paid attention to what inquiries they have.
You also did put some restrictions on that. That's correct. At least when we were during the leasing, as far as for people buying or leasing the land, they had a certain amount of time and they had to actually start building. That's sort of covered already. That they couldn't just do speculative purchase.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, we are out to bid on Mormon Trek Extended, which will be, pardon?
I don't know.
Oh, we are. We are, and that is, I believe, a 2-year project, is it not?
Yes. Yeah.
So the completion...
2 construction season project.
The completion of Mormon Trek is going to pretty much coincide with the completion of that runway extension, which also then should pretty much coincide with the closing of that north-south runway, which I don't have a map, but my guess is there's going to be another significant portion of property that's going to be available for development. Perhaps airport property as well as other property along that road.
I think this is a good time to bring up, I'm sorry, Mark.
It's nowhere near as large as the north section of Mount was.
I don't know how much is there.
It's about
I think it's a good time to bring up. Ron, did you get a chance to check with the FAA regarding that? As you can tell, I'm scared of the FAA.
Regarding what?
Well, it appears to us that the road is going to actually penetrate a portion of airport property. And we need to make sure that the FAA will allow that to become for non-aviation uses. Just got to make sure that that's okay before we go ahead and move forward.
But where you put a road, as long as it meets the safety standards, they're going to tell you that's a local decision.
Okay, as long as we get that in writing, I think it's important.
There's something I wanted to clear up on because I saw some very puzzled looks on mainly the commission's face when Steve was putting numbers out here about the 5.3 that were due. He is including in that and everything that the city has used bond money for. Now that includes the fuel system. That includes the renovation of the terminal building. That includes some 10% matches, some of which the council had looked at as a capital project and agreed to pay for. But that's the number, the 5.3, is what is out there that they used bonds to pay for. Is that? Yep. Correct. So and that's why that number seemed really high, a lot higher than we anticipated. At the commission level, we were certainly talking about the infrastructure for the Aviation Commerce Park and the hangars. And that's why there's a big difference in the two numbers.
Right.
Okay. Well, I just wanted you...
But you will check on that with that issue with the FAA, though?
Yeah, I already have.
You have?
Yeah.
At some point, we need to sit down and get the list of items that are considered, that we agree on, or that are capitalized. For example, the terminal building no question in my mind that that was to be remodeled as a municipal facility, and there was never any intention from the council's perspective, I don't believe, that that was to be paid by airport monies. But I think we need that laundry list so we don't, we need to have... We do too. No, I agree.
Our philosophy
Bernie, I
of that
think you
was
can
it was a
speak for
public.
yourself on that.
Well, I just did.
Well, and, yeah, I don't know if we clarified, we were talking earlier about the sale of the property and the lease payments covering all capital debts except possibly the master plan, which we think might be exempt. We're not sure. Are we still going with that? Was that your understanding, Steve?
My understanding was that Aviation Commerce Park, for sure.
Right.
And I asked that a report be prepared showing me all the other outstanding debt, that which is being financed by our debt service fund and/or internal loans. Knowing that the master plan piece of that list of projects may be encumbered in some fashion by the FAA, you have not decided on how to split that out.
And you had, okay, did you make up that list?
I didn't make it up, no.
Did you have that list tonight?
Yes, I just got it. Yeah, we just finished it this afternoon, so we'd have some numbers. I'm going to take this back. I need to prepare it in a fashion that's easier for the arithmetic and send it out to you.
So we have to, as a council, again, decide with our position and then work with the commission on whether we want to include all that. We have to make a policy statement. We might not do that tonight, but I think we have to do that in the near future.
These debts are already incurred, bills are already being paid. It became a matter of how did you want to use the Aviation Commerce Park resources. And that was your policy decision as a council you have to make, and you have not made that yet.
Going down through that list and looking at it, I mean, decisions to go ahead with things were made on discussions with council for the terminal, like the terminal building, for example. It was pretty clear to us as a commission that we did not need to pay that back. So
I think it was a very conscious council decision because the building, which is an outstanding building, was being allowed to deteriorate.
Right.
And we felt it was a public
City asset.
municipal building. We keep all of our buildings very well maintained, and we were letting this one totally fall apart. The other thing was that we figured it is an entrance to the city, and we try to protect those and keep them in good shape. So I agree with Ernie that there was no obligation on the airport's part. That was a council decision to redo that building, not an airport commission.
and that's what we understood too.
In fact, I think we were the ones that wanted it. Well, not that you didn't agree with it. That building needed redoing
It was a
badly.
much bigger issue than just that.
It was a much bigger issue, and it's beautiful.
Steve, when
Yes.
you get the list made, would you copy the airport?
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be.
Yep.
Okay, annexation, development issues around the airport.
Just to let you know that we're actively involved with putting together an annexation plan for all of those properties that are in and around the airport, particularly as a consequence of Mormon Trek Extended. We also have a sewer project that also is listed in your capital improvement budget. The clear intent is that the airport is not going anywhere. It is where it's going to be. The traffic system around it is being designed in a fashion to accommodate their interest as well as the general economic development policy interest.
And at some point during this process on that Mormon Trek, I think we'll get some idea of how much airport commercial property is available.
Yeah.
And how much that road makes, adds to the inventory of property that the airport will be able to sell. And at some point, as much as I love the airport, and I think the council feels it's an important airport, but I believe that if that road goes adjacent to the airport, part of the cost of that road may be assessed the parcels that it serves, which I can't imagine would amount to. But anyway.
And keep your ears for any bill put in down there at the south
There's a lot of
end.
buildings.
I heard a number of years ago when we were talking about public works down in there, and it was considered. Anything we can get complete building.
The next item is the role of the commission and its relationship to the council and city manager. From my perspective, I believe that I, as a council person, and my suspicion is the same is true of Steve, someone needs to speak for the airport commission. I mean, it's going to be either your airport manager or the chairman of the commission or someone you designate, but somebody needs to be in charge. The buck has to stop someplace. Now, who is that person?
Well,
No, I mean, now that's fine.
In total, it's the chair of the commission, but we use the airport manager as our conduit for information.
Then who should the council talk to? Who should the city manager talk to?
I would say the airport manager.
Okay, but I mean, I think, for example, when we say we want copies of FAA regulations relative to the revenues from leasing and sale of airport property, then we can expect that to come from Ron.
Absolutely.
With regards to policy, that would come from us. With regards to management and day-to-day, that would come from Ron.
I think most of the information that council and Steve probably needs generally are not policy issues. They're just everyday operational sort of issues.
Right. Yeah, and Ron would be he knows that stuff better than we.
So then if Steve needs something from the airport, he should be able to call Ron, and that's...
Oh, absolutely.
And the council.
I think that's happening.
Yeah, Ernie, I don't understand where this is coming from. It seems they do get that information.
No, because over the years, there have been lots of spokespeople for the airport. And they've all been really good people, but there needs to be one person who is the final authority. I mean, obviously, he gets that authority from you. And that is the person who I would assume would be and probably should be. But I think that's something that needs to be clear.
Right.
It's clear.
And
It's Ron.
That's Ron. Got a commission full of tech.
Any other business for us tonight? Let me just recap a couple things. We have agreed the sale of the commercial property, the proceeds will go to retired debt. Oh, and I just want to, a lot of this is precipitated by what probably would be characterized by the public as a bit of a surprise. The deficit in the budget popped up because of a lease that the conditions were such that we signed a lease that was significantly lower than, and I would ask that even though the Airport Commission has the authority to sign leases, that if there are going to be negative surprises for the council and for the general fund, that those sort of things be communicated at least to the city manager before they happen. Nothing may change, except there just won't be any surprises.
We hope not.
But anyway, we've done that. We are going to do the master plan. We do have an agreement that self-sufficiency is a goal for the airport, that is what we want to do. The marketing, obviously, is something we're going to expect from the master plan. This is kind of an aside, but really hope that Ron's office gets into the terminal building. I mean, do you think that's a little thing? I don't think that's a little thing at all. I think that's a big thing. And Ron is going to be the person who is the spokesperson for the airport when it comes to the city council and the city manager. And we're going to get copies of FAA regulations relative to the sale and or lease of property, so we can have them on file and we're not going to have this coming up all the time.
Well,
any other issues?
I just want
The school bond passes, we can move a temporary over
I'm
there.
not sure that spokesman
It
thing.
may not be, maybe too tall for the airplane.
That's fine. I just want to ask one quick question.
Yes.
How are we going to determine about the payback regarding the numbers that Steve had versus the numbers that we have on the payback?
Let's get the numbers first, then go over them.
Have another
My suspicion is there probably will be very little disagreement as to which ones are, but we don't even have the items. So I mean, you look at them, we'll look at them. I think those that we do not agree with are the ones we'll sit down and talk about. But my guess is the lion's share of them will probably be non-issues.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for getting this together so quick. I think it's a good meeting.
Well, I apologize for not having addressed this more earlier than we did, but I believe in that airport. I think it's a real asset to this community, and I think it can be better. And I really think that the idea that you need a roadmap to know where you're going, so we won't be flying by the seat of our pants.
We want to be on an instrument plan instead of a VFR.
Yeah, we want to be on, okay. Any,
Wings on it.
right, any other issues? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your support.
And then, sorry, bigger. And
Oh, you got another one?
No, I didn't. It's always a challenge. Anyways, those kind of funds, identical big funds, for funds. Oh, you're But it was matched.
This is strategic vision slash not a master. Whatever. Yeah, the consultant believes that once we get started.
I think so, yeah. That would be the goal.
One of the
I know, I actually think Oh, pay it back? Oh, gotcha. I know what you're doing back here of saying, yes, I see what you're.
Well, the headquarters is Atlanta, but we're coming out of the
7:30.
Yeah.
But it's the same.
It's the same resolution.
Yes.
7:30.
AM. I need to.
Okay.
Right.
It's kind of a
Company
Godfather, Scarface.
Actually, I almost kind of like this guy, don't you?
I do.
It just means he appreciates it. He's wax people.
I knew he was going to serve up that dog, so
That dog was toast.
yeah.
Steve? Did I hear you talk about somebody?
Thank you very much. Okay, and I just waste of time. I got you.
You still got
Oh, and I am too. It's the beauty of having friends. Yeah. Great. Oh, thanks. Fresh in my mind, you did great. I grew up
We do that sometimes.
There's a good clearance that's fabulous. Retrofitting is not always a good thing to do. It's great. Well, and I'm not skating on the pond. You skate? I thought they were sharp. My son was big deal. He's like, no, Mom, brand new skating. Well, I'm actually skating. First off, really off. And I told her that and like a good year I did.
How are you?
But I know it's like new things to do where you have to find skating. No, thank you. I